the number one problem that I see people forget when they're implementing is that they don't use any WIP limits. But once you start to question that, you realize that most of the time it's fear of saying no rather than that you actually cannot say no. Like, I have no idea how to run hospitals, but I know Kanban, and Kanban can help you to get stuff done.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the interview series with Innovation Roots. And today I'm back with another interesting guest with us, Marcus Hammarberg. Hi, Marcus. How are you?
Hey Noopur.
Marcus, thanks for being with us. I will let the people know a bit about yourself. For 15 years, Marcus has been doing agile and lean software development and helping others also to do it. He's also worked in many different settings, from big size banks and insurance company to startups and within retail as well. He's been a keynote speaker in various conferences, and he's co-authored a wonderful book called Kanban In Action, which has been translated into 5 languages across the globe, if I'm not wrong, Marcus.
Yeah, I think it's something like that. It's quite amazing when you think about it. But yes, you're right.
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. So, Marcus, my first question is about your book. So, how did you get introduced to the concepts of Kanban and what inspired you to co-author this book called Kanban in Action?
Yes, that's a good question, which with a little bit of a funny story behind it. So one of your earlier guests, actually, Joakim Sundén and I, we worked very closely together at a company called Avega, a consultancy here in Sweden. Not only that, we had some other people that has been super prominent in the Kanban community. So one guy called Chris Aschwans and another one called Håkan Fors. So all of us were working at this company, and at the same time we ran into similar issues with agile. And at the time, the problem that we had was that it was really hard to handle things that was not planned into a Scrum sprint. So how do you handle like continuously flowing items like that? There's solutions to that within the Scrum framework, but we started to look outside, and it was actually Joakim that introduced me and said like, you should check out Kanban. That's really cool. And I got hooked immediately, and very quickly also fell into looking into lean, which Kanban naturally like has leads to, and it also has a lot of its roots from the from lean as well. So I started to read a lot about that, and I started to apply it straight away in my daily job as an agile coach. And I was struck by the lightweightness of it, if that's even a word, but how easy it is to apply these very simple principles, in fact, or just like a couple of practices that will lead you towards something better. So another thing that I had done before was that I accidentally dropped my notepad 3 times during a month. So I decided to start a blog instead. So I wrote down things for myself in this blog. And on that blog, I started to write about Kanban. And then something really weird happened. One day, they called me from a publishing company called Manning, which I have read a lot of books from, and they said that they had plans on doing a book on Kanban, and they wanted to ask my input. So I was super casual and just sat there and like gave my opinions on stuff. And then at the end of the interviews, they just said like, okay, great, do you want to write that for us? And I was so shocked. So first of all, they asked me, right? I didn't think that I was anyone that could be trusted with that task. And secondly, the second thought in my head was like, I need to call Joakim. If we're going to do this, I need to do it together with him, because he had basically taught me everything that I knew about Kanban at that point. So we decided to do that together. If you ever get the opportunity to write a book, writing it together with a good friend is a challenge. We are still friends. Nothing bad happened, but it was a challenge from time to time, because it's a undertaking to write the book. Also, a very non-agile way of doing work, writing a book, because you go through some phases and then it's released and then you can't really change it. So that's how I came into doing that. I will give, at the end of this interview, I will give a book recommendation, because what I've noticed as well was that Kanban is so lightweight and so universally applicable that I started to apply it to other places as well. And I'll tell you a story about that later on. But that's one of the things that I really love with Kanban. You can introduce it from within an hour, and then just start with it, and then it can stay with you and lead you towards better, to how big or how much scaling you ever would need. So that's I've seen very few tools like that that holds over time in that manner. So that's why I love Kanban.
That's a pretty amazing story. Thanks for sharing with us, Marcus.
Yeah,
And
it felt a little bit like America's Got Talent. I got discovered without even knowing that I had something to say. So that was cool.
that's pretty amazing. So there's a quote in the book that says, "Work isn't done until it's producing value to the customer." Right? So, what was there in your mind when you were putting this out? Please share your views on this.
Yeah, no, that's a quote that many of the things that we wrote in the book at the time when we wrote it, it was like something that I understood on a shallow level, and then it's like grown on me deeper and deeper. And I tend to talk about it like this now. You know, the prototypical Kanban board, like to do, doing, done, right? I like that. I only have two problems and then one more problem. So I'll tell you, but I have a little bit of a problem with the to-do column, but we can skip that. I have a problem with the done column, because what does it mean in software development to be done with something? When is a software feature done? Well, it's not when you give it to a user, because they will use it and they will give you feedback, and you might want to tweak it and you might want to learn from what they do. So that's not really done. It's like when you take the feature away, maybe, then you're done. Now I will not touch it anymore. So done is not really the correct word. So what should it be then? Well, my suggestion is to change the done column name to something like learn or measure or track or something like that. Interestingly enough, that means that you will ask a question about what are we going to measure when you start, right? So because if you think about it, software development is really weird, right? Here's some bad news. Writing the specification, zero value. Implementing it, zero value. Testing it, zero value. Putting it into production, zero value. A user uses it in production, maybe value. And there's a man that I've learned a lot from called Woody Sully. He invented mob programming, and he also coined the term no estimates. And he said, until a user uses a feature, it's truly useless. And I mean, think about it. If you open, for example, my favorite example is to open Word. I think that Word has something around 1,300 features. How many are you using? Right? So there might be features in there that no one ever have used, but they put in, probably not because they have such a big crowd, but imagine that you put in a lot of work making a perfect features and then no one is using it. So and for me, this is actually that quote is becoming more and more important for me, because this is at the heart of how you think about flow. Flow of what? What is the thing that's flowing? It's not tickets. Us making more tickets will not make anyone happy. We are here to create value. So it's the flow of value from the perspective of the user, right? So that's why I think that the quote that you said there actually makes a whole lot of sense, because it is not until a user uses it that we can see the value. And that in turn then starts to ask the questions, when do you want to realize that value? Later or sooner? For example, going back to what if they don't even use it? So maybe it's worth doing something very, very small just to see if they're even using it. The simplest possible thing that could work. If they will not use it, we have not wasted so much time. Compare this to putting in like a year-long project to make this feature perfect and complete, and then no one uses it. Then we wasted a full year, right? So I think that thinking about it like flow of value puts your mind in the right perspective. I'm now at the client here, and I usually tell the developers here, your job is not to develop. And the testers, your job is not to test. No one has ever called the company and said like, I really love the specification, that was great. Or like, your code was awesome, or the test report was the best I've ever seen. No, they call you up and thank you if you have made some really good change in their lives, some really good thing that they can use and make use of. There's a lovely framework around this called jobs to be done that I can recommend anyone to check in. It is super easy to understand, but like shifting the mindset into jobs to be done, which aligns perfectly with user stories actually. So that's a good thing too. So that's where this quote comes from. And as I said, typically some things that I wrote, I was like, yeah, that was really good. I didn't understand that when I wrote it, but then now I understand it deeper, and now I can forgive my younger self for being a little bit cocky at the
No,
time.
no, a lot of us relate to it, and it totally makes sense what you've said.
Yeah.
And you know, Marcus, it has been almost 10 years that you have written this book, right? What changes you have seen in Kanban implementation in this decade? Any major changes that you would like to highlight?
Yeah, so I was really into the Kanban community when we wrote the book, and a couple of years after that, and it's a very vibrant community that keeps evolving Kanban itself. So the Kanban method now takes a more holistic view of changing organizations. And there's a lot of things from David J. Anderson that invented Kanban, and he's really taking that far. Uh, so what I like with what he has done is also what I have stayed with, because at the core it's super simple. But obviously, I mean, if you're going to sell a method like that, you need to supply documentation and methods and tooling. Even there's a lot of tooling around Kanban now, um, but at the core, it's really simple, and but and still very useful. So that is what I've seen, is that I've seen people go into these projects where they implement an agile method. For example, SAFe is super so popular right now in Sweden. They implement that, but they don't really understand the principles behind it. And at that point, to introduce the simple practices of Kanban, I found be a really valuable lesson for them, because then they can understand like, okay, so why do we have this meeting? What is the value that we want to get out of this? And we can start to question our current ways, because the Kanban method is a method for evolutionary change your company. So that's important. It's the first step of the Kanban method is actually start where you are. So the first thing is to not change so much what we're doing. It's not what you do when you introduce a new framework or a new tool, or even like, I mean, say for Scrum, that you give people new roles and everything like that. We're trying to keep everything as we where we are, and then by limiting work in process, which is another of these practices, we will actually start to discover how we can change from where we are into a better future. And I've noticed, I actually pondered this question quite a lot, because I haven't seen people like taking this where I worked. I know that there are companies that have taken it really far, but what I've noticed is that coming back to the foundational principles and practices of Kanban is actually helpful to evolve whatever practice you're doing right now. So if you ever feel that you're stagnated with your current ways of working, I can tell you that limiting work in process, helping flow of value to flow to customers faster, that will help you to continuously improve, which is the goal really of any Kanban method. And now I didn't really speak. If someone in the Kanban community hears this, they will be angry with me because I didn't speak. There's so much work that has been done there. But from me, from my perspective, and what I've seen is that these simple practices that are like to the core of Kanban, they still hold and they still give value in their simplicity.
Absolutely. Over the period of time, David Anderson has introduced Kanban maturity model, fit for purpose.
Indeed,
There's
right?
a lot, yeah, which we can talk about maybe sometime later, but there's a lot of depth out there. Um, so you rightly said that we have to, we cannot touch upon all the aspects of Kanban right now.
Oh, that's another interview, and that's probably better to do with someone other than me. I'm a simple man. I stay with the simple things. So
All right. So, Marcus, according to your experience, what may happen when organizations are not using the full capacity of Kanban?
mm,
Or what is your biggest no during the Kanban implementation to the teams?
yeah, so this is when you start to cheat, and we saw this early on in as I said early on when we started to use Kanban. It was a little bit of a replacement from Scrum. That was, in at least in Sweden, it was the most important method, but a replacement of other methods. And then the simplicity of Kanban got abused a little bit because we were like, yeah, you don't need any meetings, you don't need any planning, we just do it when it happens, and it got a little bit out of hand. That's not at all what Kanban is all about. In order to do that, it actually requires discipline. And the number one problem that I see people forget when they're implementing is that they don't use any WIP limits. So they do the visualization and they start to help, try to help work to flow, but they don't have any limits on how much you take in. And at that point, it's just sloppy, and it becomes, you will just escalate the problem. The WIP limits is there to ask questions. If you don't use the WIP limit to start to ask questions about what should I prioritize this over that, or should we why is this not finished yet, and start to help things to flow. That's what the WIP limit is for, and it's a tool to help you improve further. I, can I share my screen?
Sure.
Because I have a picture that I've been showing a lot. Let's see if I can
Yeah,
share
sure.
it in a good way. Yeah, here we go. So share. Maybe no. You need to help me to share this. Sorry, I should have asked you about this before.
Let me just have a look at it.
Or maybe I send you a link and you and
You
and you.
you will be able to share now.
Okay, perfect, great. There we go. There we go. So let me just show you a picture. Do you see it? Do you see the donkey?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a picture that I've been showing people a lot, and for me, this signifies how easy Kanban is to use, because you can now ask yourself, like, how much value is being delivered here? Well, not a lot, right? So, and then you can ask, how do you solve this problem? And I can tell you that many organizations, back to your question about no, the many organizations will actually answer, and people answer me like, yeah, buy another donkey, or buy longer shackles so that the donkey goes further ahead, right? When in reality, the cheapest way of solving this is to limit work in process, to take something off, right? Which in turn then start to ask some really valuable and interesting question. Because if you ask like, okay, so we're going to take a bag off here, then you can actually ask yourself, which bag? Now all of a sudden we need to know something about the value in each of these bags, because maybe one is super urgent and the other one is very valuable. So what should we do? Should we do the most valuable first, or should we do the most urgent first? Or maybe it's useful to go with everything that is located in one area of the city, for example. And another question you can ask is like, how much should we take off? Just taking one bag off will not help, because then the donkey will just bounce ahead like this, right? But the donkey knows how much is enough for it to be sustainable. And at this point, especially when I'm in the Western world speaking about this, I can ask people, do you know how they actually solve this problem? Because I've seen it. I worked in Indonesia for 2 years. They solve it by putting bags on the donkey, which will kill the donkey earlier. But that's super mean. And I usually say, like, I hope we don't do that to people. Here's the thing, though, we do. And this ties back, I promise you I will get to the point here. This ties back to the question. The big no that I see is that people working in many organizations now don't feel like they are allowed to say no, or don't feel that they are allowed to say, which of these can I prioritize? So instead, we just take on more and more work, right? This is actually one of my pet hates with Jira, and it has nothing to do with Jira. But in Jira, you can assign work to someone else. So I could put work in your inbox, which is weird, right? Because then you might end up in this situation. So it's much better to put it in a way that we can pull work when we have capacity, so that the poor donkey can say, like, you know what, now would be a good time for another bag, because now I've just delivered 2 bags, so I can take on one more. Things like that. Uh, Here's what I also noticed is that once you start to question that, you realize that most of the time it's fear of saying no rather than that you actually cannot say no. So when you are, for the most part, allowed to say no, it's only that you can say it in another way. And I remember David Anderson actually told me that his initial idea for a subtitle of the original book of Kanban was Kanban: How to Become a Yes Man. Because if you have a visualized workflow and you have a limit of how many things you can take in, then you can actually ask, you know what, this thing, it doesn't fit. It will go over the work in process limit that we have set in order to have a sustainable pace, and also for each item to flow faster. So if this doesn't fit, do you want me to stop doing one of the things that we are doing, and start doing this instead, or should this wait? That decision should really not be up to you. It's up to the person that asks you to do things. You can also take this on. First of all, that will be bad for you, but maybe they don't care. But if you do that, both of these things will now go slower. So that prioritization often gets pushed down together with the work. So when you push work onto someone or into a process, you also pushing down the responsibility of prioritizing, because these people that has this donkey in front of them, they try to do their best to deliver all of this at once, and they then do that in a very cruel way to the animal, or in that case also to the person working the process. So by introducing a whip limit somewhere in the process, you will actually start to think about how are we gonna address that we are working with too many things at the same time. So you have a much more honest conversation. So let me stop sharing that. We've seen enough. I don't share anymore. No.
Yes.
Yeah. So and a last point that I can make about this, that I've seen be a really good starting point, is to ask, if you're talking on a company level, and if you're thinking like, how many projects are we doing right now at this company? You will realize that you are doing a lot of different projects. And if you ask a developer, they will maybe be, or a tester, or anyone inside of these project organizations, they will be like, yeah, I'm 40% in that project, 50 in that project, and 10 here. That doesn't make sense, right? You can't jump across like that. So imagine if we put a limit on how many projects we can do at the same time. That has famously been done by Spotify. They had a stacked ranked list of company bets, 9 company bets, and they only worked on those 9. That meant that if you had a 10th suggestion, that would have to wait because we are now working on these 10. That was a really long answer, but I hope I
No,
addressed some of the things that you were looking for.
absolutely, absolutely. And the picture that you have showed is the great example of what if you don't put WIP limits, the WIP limits.
Yes, indeed.
So
No,
yeah,
I
it's
love
the
that picture. I think it is in the book as well. And I've been showing it to it has to be thousands of people right now because it's a picture that sticks in your head, right?
yes, absolutely. So thanks for sharing that. And then I'm moving on to something that people would like to talk about a lot, which is Kanban tools. So do
Mm.
you think that tools can solve the challenges of lack of organizations effectively? Because people tend to depend a lot on it.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and especially nowadays when we wrote the book, most of the teams that we were thinking about when we wrote the book were co-located, and you would have like a whiteboard so everything could be in one room. That is not the case anymore. We are now in a distributed world, 100%, which obviously means that we will need Kanban tools. And that's the worst chapter of our book because it got outdated like 2 months after we wrote the book. So we should never have written that book, part of the book, I think, because it would be impossible to maintain it. There's so much of innovation being done there. And I absolutely think that the tools like that can help, but not because of the tools, I think. The tools are just tools. It's in here that the work happens, and it's in understanding that we want to get work done, right? That's what we are here for. And if the tool can help us to do that, that's great. And for example, a tool like Jira, for example, that's really good because it's easy for us to keep track of the work. But it's also, in the other hand, really bad because it's very easy for work to get lost and hidden in there. So I think that it's easier for work to get lost in there than it is to see how work is flowing. If you understand what I mean. We talk about a board on a wall like this. You can't really ignore it, right? It's an information radiator giving you information. Where if you put something in, let's not bash Jira anymore, but let's say that you put it in Excel. That's a little bit more of an information fridge. You have to open it up, you have to understand how it works, so it's not in your face present, right? So for any tool that you use, regardless of if it's a hammer or if it's a digital tool, right, you need to think about, is this tool helping me to solve the problem that I have? And when it comes to organizational effectiveness, what I'm most often seen as a problem is that we measure the individual parts of the organization and rarely measure that value, the value that gets created across, which is really like opposite of what you want to do from a fundamental principle of lean, for example. That it's this value that gets that should be tracked. And that's why you see many advanced practitioners, or when you start to understand how lean works or how Kanban can be applied, you typically change your organization to support these cross-functional value oriented teams, so that they can actually do the work here. That's exactly what we're doing right at this client now, is that we're changing from this to this, so that we can support flowing all the value, flowing the value from start to finish, rather than to have like, okay, now the specification is written, now we can start to implement it, and then we can test. And you don't want that. You want to be able to move small things faster. So the tools, I think, I think there are a lot of quite amazing tools actually that I've seen, but always they are still just tools. They will not be able to solve the organizational effectiveness if you miss the mark on understanding where the value is created. Um, there's a really
Yes.
good book on that called From Project to Product, I think, by Mick Kersten, that I could recommend, that speaks about that. And that's the fundamental shift that you want to go. I actually thought about that the other day. A project is here to manage activities. That's what we do with the project. As a product, if you're product oriented, you manage value. That's the fundamental shift that happens, and then have the tools that supports that.
Yeah, that's wonderfully explained, Marcus. And now coming back to one important question, uh, which is when should anyone implement Kanban?
You can't ask me that. I would say always. Yeah, no, that is a good question. But to be honest, what I've done, and I'll get back to that point now. I worked with Kanban in the IT industry for about 10 years, no, 7 maybe. And then me and my wife, we took a couple of sabbatical years and moved with our family to Indonesia, working for the Salvation Army there with the hospitals. And so nothing that I knew anything about. I was a project manager actually. Um, but we had a problem. One of the hospitals that we were working with, so here's the short list. They didn't make any money, or actually they lost money every day. uh, they didn't pay their staff the correct wages. They didn't have a valid permit to even run a hospital, and then the roof fell in. And I was the first one that was on the second floor to see this problem. So I went up there. I got devastated because I thought that this hospital can never survive. And I came back down and I met the entire management team of the hospital, and they just said, "What are we going to do?" And I was like, I have no idea how to run hospitals, but I know Kanban, and Kanban can help you to get stuff done. So that's the answer to the question. Like, whenever you want to get stuff done, focus on value and focus on actually finishing the work before you start new work, and all of these things. Uh, then Kanban can be applied. What is fascinating to me is that I've seen this work even if the company is super advanced in agile. Because as I said before, right, if you come to a plateau where you stagnate on, like, yeah, so what are we going to do now? We follow all these good practices. Then by limiting work in process and keep tracking the value, then you can actually push yourself to get even further. So, and that's why I feel a little bit like an old scratchy record, because I keep repeating myself. But it's also the power of the tool is that it can be applied in many different situations in and I said before, if nothing else, imagine putting a limit on how many projects you are doing at once in your company. That will have an enormous effect on your flow of value. I promise you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for answering all these questions with so much patience and depth.
Yeah,
Uh,
great question. Thanks a lot.
so it was a good round of question and answer, but now we'll move on to a little lighter section where I'll ask you some rapid fire questions.
I,
Uh,
I
to
this is
know
my
you a
first
little
time doing
more.
rapid fire. I'm ready. I'm ready.
All right. So, do you like texting or calling your friends and family?
Friends and family probably calling, but I thought about this and I thought I would say calling, but I think I'm texting mostly nowadays actually. So yeah, even to my kids, I'm texting like you need to come home. You haven't done your dishes, or I love you, or whatever.
All right. So, do you remember your favorite childhood TV show?
Oh yes, I do. But I would be hard pressed to think that anyone outside Sweden remember any one of those. But the thing is, I remember one called oh, it was a history cartoon history thing that came from France that I really loved. And then I got a second childhood, of course, when my kids with TV, when my kids got was born, and we lived in Indonesia and we saw the Disney Channel, so all these Mickey Mouse Treehouse and stuff like that. That's stuck in my head with all these tunes, and
Yeah,
I'm afraid that it will never get out.
absolutely. Mickey Mouse and such stuff will never get out of our heads. Like
No,
for
yeah,
me too,
it's in there.
it's in there. Do you have a favorite day of the week, Marcus?
Yes, I right now it's actually Wednesdays because I divided my so I only work 4 days a week, so I have an extra Saturday on Wednesdays, and that is really a favorite day of mine because then I could really be no one else is free, so it's not that you meet anyone else that is off, so it's just a day for me. So that's right now that's my favorite day. Also, in the evening of that day, we have a rehearsal with the band that I'm playing in. So that's also
Wow.
a lot of fun.
Oh, that's great to know about you.
Mm.
And do you have any place you most want to travel?
Yeah, I would really love to go to Japan. Uh, that is a dream place to travel to. I think that I might never do that actually because I try to avoid flying and it's a really long train ride. So
Yeah.
we'll see, but that would be amazing. First of all, because I've learned so much about lean and Toyota production system and stuff like that. But also,
Yes.
it's one of these mythical places that I really want to visit.
Yes, absolutely. It's beautiful as well. I mean, it's in my list also to go
Yeah.
to
No,
Japan.
yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. And my last question is, if you have to gift a book to me, which book you would like to give?
So first of all, we have now been talking, and thank you so much for mentioning that book, Kanban in Action, that me and Joachim wrote. But then the story that I told about the Indonesian hospital, I actually wrote a book about that as well, and that is called Salvation, the Bung Su story. The hospital was called the Bung
Mhm.
Su Hospital, so it's called the Bung Su story, and that's about how we apply the Kanban in practice in a very non-software world. However, I can't be so egotistical that I only talk about me. So I would love anyone to read a book called Turn the Ship Around by David L. Marquis. It's an
Mhm.
amazing story about a submarine captain applying intent-based leadership. So that's I can highly recommend that. And if you're nerdy and into math and stuff like that, then there's a book on estimation, or rather prognosis driven estimates, by Dan Vacanti, called When Will It Be Done? That
Mhm.
I use at every client where I go. I have a
Mhm.
little Google sheet that I just bring on and just keep adding to, which helps me and makes me look amazing when it's really Dan that should have all the praise for that. So, When Will It Be Done by Dan McCanty? It's a really good book.
Thanks for these recommendations, Marcus. And now we're coming to the end of the discussion. We have touched upon many areas related to Kanban, and I would like to conclude with your expert tip for the future Kanban enthusiasts. What would you like to advise them?
So I think that Kanban works because it's not dictating that much of a process. But with that comes a little bit of a responsibility also, because then you can't be lazy. So the way to do Kanban is to start to apply it to your world. And the the way to do that is very simple. Start where you are, make your work visible, have a limit, not a low limit, but a limit. Start with how many things you are doing right now and don't add anything new until you have finished whatever you do. And then continuously help the work to flow faster, flow of value. You can do that for yourself in your own work. You can chunk your day up into 1 hour increments and work on one item at a time. Or you can apply it to your team, and you could even apply it to your entire organization. So just doing it's a thing that you learn by doing. So I would recommend anyone to just jump in and do it and read and watch a lot of the early material that was written about Kanban back in the 2007 and those time, because it still holds, it's still good. Don't be intimidated by all the other things that are around. You can get there later, it's amazing, but you don't need to learn that right now. You can start where you are, and you can do that now, right after this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marcus. It was wonderful to have you with us, sharing so many anecdotes, so many experiences, and some advices for the future enthusiasts as well. And we look forward to learn more from you and look forward to your book as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Noopur, for inviting me as well. So thanks a lot.